You believe you are a good person. You tell yourself that if history had tested you, you would have stood on the right side, that in moments of collective madness, you would have resisted, that under pressure, your moral compass would have held. This belief feels comforting. It allows you to sleep at night, but it is built on an illusion. You are not good. You are simply untested. Your morality has never been placed under conditions where it becomes inconvenient, dangerous, or costly. You have never had to choose between survival and conscience, between belonging and truth, between obedience and responsibility. Goodness, under comfort, means nothing. As long as food is available, laws are enforced, and authority appears stable, morality is cheap. It costs you nothing to be kind when nothing is at stake. But remove the structure, remove the oversight, add pressure, fear, anonymity, and permission. What emerges is not a different kind of person. It is the same person masked. This is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Evil does not require monsters. It requires ordinary people placed inside distorted systems. The greatest atrocities in history were not committed by sadists lurking on the margins of society. They were carried out by neighbors, by parents, by employees following procedures, people who, the day before, believed they were decent. What you call character is far more fragile than you think. It bends, it adapts, it dissolves under the right conditions. This is what psychologists call the Lucifer Effect. Not a theory about villains, a diagnosis of normality. It explains how environments overpower values, how roles rewrite identity, how good intentions collapse without resistance. And most dangerously, it explains why the people most capable of harm are often the ones who never imagine themselves capable of it, because they never see it coming. By the end of this examination, you will no longer view history, news, or human behavior in the same way. You will no longer be able to say, "I would never do that," without hesitation. More importantly, you will understand the precise mechanisms that pull people down the slope from small compromises to irreversible acts. The psychological switches that transform restraint into cruelty. And once you see those switches, you gain something rare, the ability to interrupt them, because goodness that is unconscious is not goodness at all. It is passivity. And passivity, under the wrong system, becomes participation. This is not about condemning yourself. It is about waking up before the test arrives. Because the line between good and evil does not run through ideologies, nations, or enemies. It runs through you. And unless you learn to watch that line, it will move quietly, increment by increment, till one day you no longer recognize the person you have become. When people witness cruelty, they instinctively search for a defect in the individual. They want a simple explanation, a flaw in character, a rotten core. This instinct protects the ego. If evil belongs to a certain type of person, then it does not belong to you. But this belief collapses the moment you examine how behavior actually forms. Human beings are not fixed structures. They are adaptive systems. What you call personality is often a temporary arrangement, held in place by routine, oversight, and social expectation. Change the container, and the contents change with it. This is the mistake most people make when judging history. They focus on the actor, not the environment. They condemn the individual and ignore the machinery that shaped them. Decades ago, a simple but disturbing question was posed. What happens when ordinary people are placed inside a corrupted situation? Not criminals, not extremists, not ideologues. Average individuals, screened for psychological health, dropped into a new role with new rules. The result was not slow, it was immediate. Given authority, anonymity, and a defined enemy, people did not rise to their values. They adapted to the role. Behavior shifted before belief did. Cruelty emerged before ideology. What this reveals is devastating. Morality is not a rock. It is a fluid. It takes the shape of the container it is poured into. Place a person inside a system that rewards obedience over reflection, efficiency over empathy, and loyalty over conscience, and the system will win. Not because people are evil, but because they are responsive. You may feel confident that you would resist, that you would see through it, that your mind is stronger than most. But strength is meaningless without exposure. You have not been deprived of sleep while holding power over another person. You have not been isolated inside a role where cruelty is normalized. You have not been told, repeatedly, by authority figures that harm is necessary for order. Until you have stood in those conditions and refused to comply, you do not know who you are. You only know who you are right now inside a stable environment that asks very little of your conscience. This is the first fracture in the myth of goodness. Evil does not arrive with horns and certainty. It arrives with context, with uniforms, with procedures, with justification. And once behavior shifts, belief follows. The mind hates contradiction. When actions conflict with self-image, the mind rewrites the story. It was necessary. It was for safety. It was for the greater good. This is how people become things they once condemned, not in one moment, but through adaptation. The danger is not that you are uniquely cruel. The danger is that you are human. There are specific conditions under which ordinary restraint collapses. They are not exotic. They are not rare. They are present in subtle forms throughout modern life. The first is anonymity. When identity dissolves, accountability follows. You are biologically wired to respond to faces, to eyes, to recognition. When those signals disappear, empathy weakens. Remove names. Replace them with numbers, avatars, roles. You no longer act as an individual. You act as a function. Anonymity does not hide cruelty. It frees it. When no one can trace action back to a self, the self detaches. Behavior becomes abstract. Consequences become distant. This is why people say things online they would never say in a room. Why mobs behave in ways individuals never would. Why uniforms and masks have always accompanied violence. The second condition is dehumanization. You cannot harm a human being. Easily, your nervous system resists it. So the mind performs a substitution. The person becomes a category, a label, an obstacle. Once reduced, empathy no longer applies. Language does most of the work here. Words drain reality of complexity. Enemies, targets, assets, collateral. The more technical the language becomes, the less human the subject feels. This is not accidental. Organizations learn quickly that cruelty becomes efficient when humanity is removed from the equation. The third condition is authority. This is the most powerful of all. Human beings are trained from childhood to obey. Teachers, parents, supervisors, experts, authority short-circuits conscience by offering relief. If someone above you claims responsibility, you feel absolved. If a system endorses action, doubt weakens. I was just following orders is not an excuse. It is a psychological mechanism. When authority speaks calmly, confidently, and repeatedly, most people comply even when their bodies resist. Not because they are malicious, because they are conditioned. This is how harm becomes normalized. The three conditions rarely appear alone, they cluster. Anonymity removes identity. Dehumanization removes empathy. Authority removes responsibility. Together, they create a vacuum where cruelty feels procedural rather than personal. And once inside that vacuum, most people drift, not because they want to hurt others, but because nothing tells them to stop. Most people believe that evil requires hatred, that harm must be fueled by anger, ideology, or pleasure. This belief is false. Some of the most destructive acts in history were carried out by people who felt nothing at all. They were not enraged. They were not fanatical. They were compliant. When an authority figure frames an action as necessary, procedural, or inevitable, responsibility migrates upward. The individual no longer experiences themselves as a moral agent. They become an instrument. This psychological shift is subtle, but devastating. The body reacts first: sweat, tension, hesitation, but the mind quickly intervenes. It offers rationalizations that reduce discomfort. This is required. This is policy. This is not my decision. Once the story is accepted, conscience quiets. What remains is task completion. This is why harm administered through systems is often more severe than harm committed in passion. There is no emotional release, no moment of reflection, just repetition. The danger is not the presence of authority. It is the absence of resistance to it. Human beings are deeply uncomfortable standing alone against instruction. Social pressure triggers the same stress responses as physical threat. Your heart accelerates. Your thoughts narrow. Your instincts push you toward compliance. Obedience feels safe in the moment. It transfers risk away from the self. But this safety is an illusion, because every time responsibility is outsourced, the capacity for moral judgment weakens. Over time, the question shifts. Not is this right, but is this expected? And when expectation becomes the metric, almost anything can be justified. This is how ordinary people participate in extraordinary harm without ever labeling themselves as cruel. They do not see themselves as perpetrators. They see themselves as employees. This is not an indictment of institutions alone. It is a warning about human nature under pressure. If you have never refused authority when refusal carried consequences, you do not know the limits of your integrity. You only know the limits of your comfort. Evil almost never arrives as a dramatic decision. It does not announce itself as a turning point. It enters quietly, as a minor exception, a small adjustment, a choice that feels uncomfortable but manageable. You tell yourself it is temporary, that it is harmless, that it does not define you. This is how the descent begins. The human mind is built to protect identity. When behavior conflicts with self-image, the mind resolves the tension not by changing behavior, but by rewriting meaning. You did not lie. You simplified. You did not harm. You followed protocol. Each explanation smooths the path for the next step. Once a line is crossed, returning to it becomes psychologically expensive. Admitting error threatens the story you tell about yourself, so the line moves. What once felt unacceptable becomes tolerable. What once felt tolerable becomes routine. What once required justification no longer requires thought. This is not corruption by explosion. It is corrosion. Increment by increment, conscience erodes. The most dangerous aspect of this process is that it feels normal while it is happening. There is no alarm, no sudden shock. You remain functional, respected, integrated. From the outside, nothing appears wrong. But internally, thresholds are shifting. You begin to tolerate language you once resisted. You stay silent when something disturbs you. You convince yourself that speaking up would change nothing. Silence becomes practice, and practice becomes habit. This is how systems sustain harm without constant force. They rely on gradual accommodation. Each individual compromise feels insignificant, but together they form a pattern that cannot be undone easily. The danger is not that you will suddenly become cruel. The danger is that you will become comfortable. Comfortable enough not to notice when your moral range has narrowed. Comfortable enough to confuse stability with integrity. When a crisis finally arrives, you will not rise to the occasion. You will default to the level you have trained yourself to accept, and that level is rarely as high as you imagine. There is a deeper layer beneath systems and situations, one that does not depend on uniforms, commands, or crowds. It lives inside you. Every person carries a curated identity into the world, a face designed to be acceptable, predictable, safe. This persona is not false, but it is incomplete. Behind it exists everything you were taught to suppress: aggression, envy, resentment, the urge to dominate rather than submit. This hidden region is not erased by denial, it is intensified. What you refuse to acknowledge does not disappear. It waits. When people describe themselves as nice, they often mean something else. They mean restrained, unassertive, deprived of power. This is not virtue. Virtue requires choice. A being incapable of harm is not moral, it is neutralized. The danger of repression is not that darkness exists. It is that it operates without supervision. When denied, aggression does not become gentler. It becomes erratic. This is why the most explosive acts often come from those who insist they are incapable of cruelty. They have no relationship with their own capacity for it. They are shocked when it surfaces. Integration is not indulgence. It is recognition. You look at what you are capable of, and you do not flinch. You do not excuse it. You do not act it out. You simply admit it is there. This admission is nauseating. It should be. That discomfort is the boundary that keeps power in check. Once you see the part of you that enjoys control, that feels satisfaction in dominance, that wants to punish when provoked, you can monitor it. You can interrupt it. Without awareness, it commands behavior from behind the scenes. With awareness, it becomes contained. This is the difference between a controlled force and an uncontrolled one. People who deny their shadow are at its mercy. People who integrate it are responsible for it. Goodness without awareness is fragile. It shatters under pressure. Goodness with awareness is resilient because it is chosen. This is the paradox most people avoid. To be trustworthy, you must know exactly how dangerous you could be and decide not to be. If the descent into harm were inevitable, this knowledge would be useless. But it is not. Just as systems can pull people downward, there are psychological habits that interrupt the slide. They do not require extraordinary courage. They require preparation. Most people imagine heroism as something rare, cinematic, reserved for exceptional individuals. This belief is convenient. If heroes are special, then failure is excusable. You were never meant to act. In reality, heroism is ordinary, and that is precisely why it is difficult. It usually looks awkward, uncelebrated, socially costly. Resisting a corrupted situation does not feel noble in the moment. It feels disruptive. It feels like being the person who ruins the mood. The one who asks the uncomfortable question. The one who refuses to laugh along. Your biology resists this. Social rejection triggers the same systems as physical danger. Your heart races, your palms sweat. Your mind searches for justification to comply. This is why resistance must be trained before it is needed. You do not decide to act ethically under pressure. You default to whatever habits you have practiced. Small moments matter. Do you interrupt cruelty disguised as humor? Do you challenge dishonesty when it is convenient to ignore? Do you admit mistakes quickly, or do you conceal them to protect image? These are not moral gestures. They are conditioning. Each time you act against the pull of conformity, you weaken its grip. Each time you choose silence for comfort, you strengthen it. There is also a critical skill that separates those who resist from those who comply. The pause. Systems that generate harm rely on speed, urgency, momentum. Sign here, decide now, act immediately. The pause disrupts this. A brief moment of separation between stimulus and response allows judgment to re-enter. What is actually being asked of me? Who benefits from this action? Does this align with the person I claim to be? This pause is small, but its consequences are enormous. It is the difference between reflex and choice. You must also learn to recognize the environment you are in. Are you anonymous? Are you operating behind a role rather than as yourself? Are you deferring responsibility upward? Are you reducing others to categories rather than individuals? When these signals cluster, you are in a danger zone. Awareness does not guarantee resistance. But without awareness, resistance is impossible. The most unsettling truth is this: standing against the system rarely earns praise. More often, it earns hostility. Integrity functions like a mirror. It reflects the compromises others have made, and people do not thank mirrors for honesty. This is why courage is isolating. But isolation is not the same as weakness. It is the cost of remaining intact. There is a final misunderstanding about morality that must be dismantled. Most people believe ethics is flexible, contextual, something to be negotiated when circumstances demand it. This belief feels sophisticated, realistic. It is also what makes people predictable. When values remain vague, they are easily overridden by fear, reward, or authority. A principle that has not been defined in advance cannot survive pressure. This is why resistance fails in the moment it is most needed. People believe they will decide when the time comes. But when the time comes, physiology takes over. Stress narrows attention. Urgency suppresses reflection. What remains is habit. The only defense against this is clarity, a line drawn before it is tested. Not a general desire to be good, not a self-image of decency, a code, explicit, unambiguous, non-negotiable. It defines what you will not do regardless of cost. What you will refuse even when refusal isolates you. What you will sacrifice status for without resentment. This code is not abstract philosophy, it is operational. When pressure rises, you do not reason your way through chaos. You act from memory. History offers quiet proof of this. Those who resisted atrocities were not smarter, braver, or better informed. They were clearer. They knew in advance where the line was. And when asked to cross it, they did not debate. They recognized the moment and stepped away. This clarity does not make you pure. It makes you prepared. You must also accept a difficult truth. Integrity is not socially rewarded in real time. When you refuse to participate, others will not thank you. They will resent you. Your refusal exposes their compliance. Your pause disrupts their comfort. They may call you self-righteous, naive, difficult. This is the cost. Most people choose belonging over conscience, safety over solitude, not because they are evil, but because they are afraid. You must decide whether you are willing to stand without applause. There is no guarantee that resistance will succeed, only that compliance will not absolve you. This is the weight of awareness. Once you understand how environments shape behavior, ignorance is no longer available as shelter. You are responsible for monitoring the conditions you enter, for noticing when anonymity, dehumanization, and authority converge. You cannot pretend not to see. The battle between harm and restraint is not fought in dramatic moments. It is fought in small decisions, repeated daily. In emails, in meetings, in silence. You are not asked to be perfect, only conscious, because the question is not whether you are capable of good or evil. You are capable of both. The question is whether you will recognize the moment when choice still exists, take responsibility for it. Once that moment passes, the system will decide for you, and it will not carry the consequences on your behalf.